So, you've all seen the title and thumbnail, and yes, I'm serious. But there's so much more to it than just that. In fact, it's just a hook I'm using to drag you deeper into this rabbit hole, one from which there shall be no escape. Anyway. Hey there everyone, this is Shiro, and welcome to the craziest video I have ever created to date. Usually I present you all with an ironclad case and have already taken all potential counter-arguments and rebuttals into account, debunking them in my video. Of course, that doesn't stop people from not watching the video or not paying any attention to it, and posting those exact same already debunked takes in the comments. Seriously people, do better. Don't embarrass yourselves like that. But back on topic. This time everything's going to be different, because what I'll present you with is a train of thought and logic that does make sense, but cannot be substantiated to the extent that it is well and truly an open and shut case. Still, based on the current evidence we have on hand, I'm convinced that at least with some of what I'm about to explain to you, especially the Phanes being the Primordial Human part, I'm on the right track. I'm going to make a number of outlandish claims in this video, some of which will eventually be proven correct in the future, some others will turn out to have been wrong, and another portion will appear to be false at first, but eventually turn out to have been right all along. But why is that? It's because writers love to deliberately mislead their audience. How do I know this? Because I'm an author and I have been working on stories for more than 25 years. And I also love to deliberately cause my audience to mislead itself. It's such a joy to watch. Since the release of Before Sun and Moon, something has been bugging me, and it's this exact sentence right here. That Primordial One may have been Phanes. May have been. Those three words are the key here. They were very deliberately chosen to sow doubt, yet nearly every single lore enthusiast has since then been claiming that Phanes, of course, has to be the name of the Primordial One, when OES writers have very deliberately never confirmed this. But hold on, didn't we just recently get final confirmation? After all, in the Luna 7 special program, Alice's voice actress does refer to an incident when Nibelung tries to assassinate Phanes, and even more recently, in Nicole's character teaser, she addresses the Heavenly Principles by that name. Shouldn't all of that well and truly seal the deal? Oh, my dear fellow lore addicts, no. That is not at all what it means. You fell for the writer's trap. Hook, line, and sinker. When an author wants to cause you to mislead yourself, they first start out with a statement that can be interpreted in multiple different ways. Here we have the Primordial One may have been Phanes, which leaves the door open to two possibilities. The Primordial One is Phanes, as well as the Primordial One is not Phanes. Then, the next step is to introduce information to make the reader think that one of these options is obviously the sole correct one. Right here we have those two instances that I previously mentioned, the Luna 7 special program one and the Nicole character teaser one. And eventually, potentially after even more evidence that will solidify this as the sole correct understanding comes out, there comes the reveal. The reader was the one who was wrong from the start, and the author did never lie to them. They just use sneaky wording to cause the reader to mislead themselves. It's all by design. So what does this mean in our case here? Will something be retconned, where we told any lies? Fret not. The answer to both of these questions is a clear no. Phanes is indeed the name of the Heavenly Principles, and Nibelung did try to assassinate Phanes. But the Heavenly Principles were never the Primordial One. That, my good fellows, is the real secret that Orobashi had to die for. The three simple words, may have been. I do not know exactly how it happened, because we're still missing far too much information, but at some point, the original Primordial One, the original eternal throne of the heavens, got replaced, and seemingly nobody remembers. Only those who wrote Before Sun and Moon had an inkling that something was off, but even they couldn't be sure. Or they never dared to make the claim, fearing punishment. At this point in the video, you're likely either still disagreeing with the claim I made in this chapter, and my point of view overall, or maybe you're on the fence. But there is still far more to come, don't you worry. What even is a Primordial Human? We came across our first real mentions of the term back when Albedo was in the limelight. According to him, his master and mother, Rhine was working on the Primordial Human project, which aimed to create a human via alchemy. He also once told him the following: "Chalk is the spotless soil and was used to make primordial man." And in his story quest, Albedo extrapolates on this further. Those born of earth are bound by its imperfections, but those born of chalk are free of impurities. What we can take away from this is one simple truth. The Primordial Human, at least according to Rhine understanding, is free of imperfections. They are pure and uncontaminated. Alright, so far so good. But what else do we have? Renee de Petrichor once had an interesting nugget of wisdom to share on the topic. I'm just going to read you the whole quote here because many parts of it will be very important in the later parts of the video. Io pan, that which lies beneath the great sea. The purpose of this line in the ritual scripture is to forsake the self and sink into the abyss, and in the abyss to welcome rebirth as a holy infant. The origin of this is a tragedy of unknown provenance that has been passed down by persons unknown to this day. That play is called Ajax or Ayas. He was the second strongest warrior in his alliance. Lies beneath the great sea is, itself, an interesting phrase. It comes from ancient Sumeru texts and should be read as Narayana, which also means primordial human. This, too, is my goal, for not all that comes from beyond may be as one that descends. That title belongs only to wills that can rival an entire world. That is what I seek, the way to become just such a will, one that can protect the world, sustain the world, destroy the world, and create the world. I'll simply focus on the part that is relevant for this chapter of the video. Renee equates the Primordial Human to welcoming rebirth as a holy infant. So let's add the attribute holy to therefore discovered pure. But we're not remotely done yet. During the Temple of Space World Quest series, Milanta mentions that children of humanity are all who descend from the first ancestor shaped by the Lord of All and those born of that lineage. And yes, even the Fontanians count. There's an argument to be made that this first ancestor could be the Primordial Human, as it would make sense for this to be the case, so let us keep that possibility in mind. That aside, a few moments later, Milanta mentions the fact that there's a heretical myth that light and darkness birthed the Primordial Human. But because Milanta didn't elaborate further, we then later ask Historia about the heretical myth that was mentioned, and here's how he responds. The first thing that came to mind was a parable once condemned as heresy by the angels. It tells of the god of light who created a body in its own likeness, only for it to be stolen away by the king of darkness. Thus, within that single body, the powers of light and darkness began to contend with one another, and so the Primordial Human, bearing both, came to possess both good and evil. It's a lesser-known version of the Primordial Human myth. There's a lot to unpack here, but we'll do so in the later chapters of the video. For now, let's hone in on one part. Clearly, the Primordial Human was once purely good and the creation of the God of Light. That tracks perfectly with what we confirmed earlier, the attributes pure and holy. But at some point, that purity was tainted due to the actions of the so-called King of Darkness, which caused the powers of darkness and evil to take root in the Primordial Human as well. As a result, they became filled with impurities. Remember what Albedo said earlier? Those born of earth are bound by its imperfections, but those of chalk are free of impurities. Well, I left out the second half of what he was talking about. You and I are alike, both composed of a substance that has yet to be fully defined. The you here refers to us, the traveler, and we are a descender. Albedo is directly equating himself to a descender here, implying that not only was Rhine aiming to create a Primordial Human, but she might have been trying to make a descender, or a perfect life, as we do know that she is pursuing some sort of perfection. And to add on to that, Renee's mention of the Primordial Human was also in the context of himself aiming to become a descender. So, based on all of that, I'll be making two claims. One, when Albedo talks about those born of Earth, he's talking about the children of humanity. It makes perfect sense, as anybody descending from the already impure Primordial Human would indeed be bound by those impurities as well. And two, a pure, untainted Primordial Human may not necessarily always be a descender, but they should have the potential to become one. Switching gears for a moment, let's talk about another extremely important revelation that we got from Melanta and Historia. The heretical myth that they mention talks about two central figures, which I believe we can conclusively assign to two particular beings from Teyvat's past, the God of Light and the King of Darkness. I'll just come right out and say it. I believe the God of Light to be Nibelung and the King of Darkness to be the Primordial One. The Primordial One, not the Heavenly Principles. I'll explain that particular detail later. So, why do I think Nibelung is the God of Light? Well, it's simple. He ruled over the literal light realm, and he had a will that shone more brilliantly than all the civilizations that a Voyager had ever seen. But didn't the God of Light create a body in its own likeness? So how could it be Nibelung? Isn't he always depicted as a dragon? Yeah, you're right, that he is. But keep in mind that his other creations, the three Moon Sisters, also have human forms. We can argue that they might have just adjusted their own forms later on when they came to watch over humanity, but there's another possibility. Before Nibelung ever made the three Moon Sisters, and likely before he made the Primordial Human as well, he got warned about an imminent threat by the Voyager, Sotavoinen. We have no idea how exactly she contacted him, but it is possible that she projected herself to him in a human form. That is my theory, at least. But even if that isn't true, would the Primordial Human being made in the likeness of a dragon really be that outlandish? Not really. We have far too many instances of dragons or Vishaps taking on human form throughout Genshin's lore. Let's not harp on about this any longer for now, though. I admit, on its own, the arguments I have for Nibelung being the God of Light are not 100% convincing. But after you hear the arguments for the Primordial One being the King of Darkness, I'd be flabbergasted if your thoughts stay the same. We all know that Genshin's world building is heavily inspired by Gnosticism, and in Gnosticism there's the concept of the Demiurge. It's a lesser god than the true creator of all, and is responsible for creating the imperfect material world. It's seen as an evil or incompetent being, which is either just blind or ignorant of the truth. And what is the Primordial One, or rather Phanes, but we'll get into that later, described as doing? Terraforming the planet of Teyvat, creating the human realm so that humans may survive here. To the pure light realm, they brought the void realm, or in other words, the abyss, which is often rightly associated with darkness. With both combined, they created the human realm. Sound familiar? It should, because it parallels the time when the pure primordial human was tainted by darkness. But of course, there is much, much more. One name for the Demiurge in some Gnostic sects is Yaldabaoth, which some scholars have translated as Child of Darkness or Child of Chaos. Then there's the fact that the servants of the Demiurge in Gnosticism are called Archons. And would you look at that, we have those in the game, serving Celestia. Speaking of, the Archons, the other gods, as well as the Shades and Paimon have quite interesting names, don't they? They're all named after demons from the Ars Goetia. Demons. That aside, as a last little tidbit, I found that Neuvillette refers to the present ruler of Teyvat as a cluster of filthy feathers. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a god of light to me. As you can see, the Primordial One makes quite a compelling King of Darkness. So, assuming that I allocated the roles correctly, then what exactly is going on here? How come people thought Phanes may be the Primordial One? How come the Heavenly Principles now took over for the Primordial One, secretly replacing them? To answer all of these questions will not be simple, but I'll give it a try. In this part of the video, I'll lay out the events that I propose happened all that time ago. First, I'll tell you a story, and then afterwards, I'll explain my reasoning and point out a couple of important details that convince me that what I'm about to present you might be very close to the truth. Once upon a time, Nibelung, the king of dragons and ruler of Teyvat, got reached out to by the Voyager, Sotavoinen, who warned him that his planet was fated for ruin. She invited him to join her on a journey through the universe, but he refused, intent on protecting his people and eventually leading them beyond the stars. After Sotavoinen left, Nibelung started working on two separate projects. One of them was to raise 3 moons into the sky, which would govern over the authorities of life, death, space, time, and reason in his absence. The other one was the creation of the Primordial Human, Phanes, who was intended to become the ideal ruler over them all, a perfect creation tailor-made to resist the threat to come. However, before Phanes was born from within the eggshell that incubated him, Nibelung left for the Sea of Stars to search for something more that would bestow upon his people an even greater advantage. If everything had gone according to plan, then once Phanes hatched from the eggshell, he would have been perfected. But that day never came, or at least it didn't come in the way that Nibelung had intended. Hundreds, if not thousands of years after Nibelung embarked on his journey, an outsider arrived, the Primordial One. Scanning the planet of Teyvat from the outside, it was satisfied with what it saw. This world could indeed play host to the humanity it aimed to shepherd and protect. But it also found something else. The not yet born Phanes, a perfect, pure life. Choosing this Primordial Human as either its vessel or agent in the world, it tainted him with darkness and led to his birth. Phanes had wings and a crown, and was androgynous in nature. By all accounts, he appeared divine. Primordial One controlled Phanes, then created 4 shining shades of himself, and using the eggshell he had hatched from, fashioned a false sky surrounding Teyvat and its atmosphere. Considering how far into space a planet's atmosphere actually extends, it's no wonder that even the 3 moons were included within this grand creation. Announcing itself to the world in this fashion, the Primordial One used Phanes and his shades to go to war with the 7 dragon sovereigns, defeating them after a lengthy 40 years of battle. Right afterwards, the terraforming process kicked off. After the stage was set, humans were then introduced to the new human realm by Primordial One controlled Phanes. Fast forward to many thousands of years later, and skipping over many important but not relevant events, eventually Nibelung returned, but he was corrupted by the Abyss. In the war of funerary flame against Sutavoinen, Koitar, and an enraged Nibelung, the usurper, the Primordial One, had its functions ruined and could no longer use the absolute authority to suppress the original order of Teyvat. Worse yet, the planet was also extremely heavily damaged. It was at this time, when the Primordial One was injured, or perhaps even on the brink of destruction, that Phanes regained control over himself. Using this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he wrestled back control over Teyvat and ruled it from that point forward. However, he also didn't make it out of that mess unscathed. As the public face of the Primordial One, he had taken the brunt of Nibelung's initial attack, and most of the time would be recovering in a deep sleep, only intervening with matters of the mortal world when absolutely necessary. But over the course of thousands of years, humanity, still as filled with impurities and imperfections as ever, made many efforts to gain freedom and learn the truth of the world. Quite often those resulted in horrendous consequences for the world at large, and Phanes would eventually find himself partially corrupted by the Abyss, still not healed from his old wounds, and even further injured due to new cataclysmic events. That's why in the current day and age, he has yet to awaken. Alright, that was a lot to take in for you all, I'm sure. Now, let me add a few things to convince you. I'm sure you've all heard about the Primordial One is an AI theories that are floating around, so I shan't elaborate on that. I'm not necessarily fully agreeing with them, but it's indeed a possibility. Whether or not they are the AI of the Traveler Twins' spaceship, they are indeed a bot of some kind, at least if we believe Nuvalet's voice lines. Now, moving on to Phanes, the Primordial Human. Notice how he is born from an egg? While that is indeed a reference to the cosmic egg from various mythologies, there's also one more thing I would like to point out. Saurians lay eggs, and Saurians are degenerated forms of dragons. Therefore, at least symbolically, it would make sense for Nibelung's Primordial Human to be born from an egg. Dragons are just big, cooler lizards after all. Next, there's the point that Phanes served as the vessel or agent of the Primordial One. I base this on the fact that it isn't particularly rare for stronger or foreign beings to take over the bodies of others, of Teyvat natives. One famous example is the Voyager, Sutavoinen, who took over the mind of a young boy to walk the planet of Teyvat. But even if Phanes' body was not directly controlled by the Primordial One, the Primordial Human was indeed tainted by the King of Darkness, which should allow them to hold some sway over them. The way in which I presented the story, all story details still make sense. Nibelung tries to assassinate Phanes. The Primordial One may have been Phanes. Phanes is the Heavenly Principles. The Heavenly Principles is the first Descender. The Shades are creations of the Heavenly Principles. And there's a real, actual secret that Orobashi discovered, that Phanes, the Heavenly Principles, is not the Primordial One. But why take over the system the King of Darkness left behind and assume his role? Well, we can only speculate here, but perhaps that was the most efficient way to save the dying planet? Establishing an entirely new order may have been more difficult, or would have taken too long, or would have been too much of a toll to handle. But wait a moment, Didn't I just say something that doesn't really make sense? How could the heavenly principles, Phanes, be the first descender if I have previously claimed that to even have the potential to become a descender, he would have to have been a pure, untainted primordial human, which he clearly wasn't anymore after the Primordial One blessed him with its powers of darkness? Well, to explain that, we have to open another can of worms. Remember Zibai's situation? The three deadly selves are a result of an ancient art called the Trifactor Excision, which excises them from the practitioner. The three deadly selves are described as the impure thoughts and wicked desires that pollute the mind. To cast them aside is to glimpse the unmarred self, pure and clean. The Trifactor Excision is not the only name for this process. In Sumeru, it's known as Shattering Atmagraha, and René de Petrichor from Fontaine called his own version of it the Renunciation of the Ego. We don't really know anything about the Sumeru version, but the Fontaine one does have a lot of intel associated with it, mainly thanks to the Narzissenkreuz world quests. According to René, he aimed to remove his useless personality, believing that one's own will is an obstacle. But this is not where it ends. In the new Temple of Space world quest, Yu Huangyi mentions that the relentless torment and tempering of the apathic interval is very similar to the ancient art of severing the three deadly selves, so Trifactor Excision. How so? Well, the apathic interval aims to grind away all will, thought and desire from those forced to endure it. Meanwhile, Trifactor Excision and its cousin, the Renunciation of the Ego, aim to excise wicked desires, will and personality from oneself. I can see why he thought the two of them to be similar. In fact, I'd even go further than that and say that Trifactor Excision and its numerous variants were directly inspired either by the apathic interval itself or by the same source. But what's that source the two of them can be traced back to? In my view, that's Phanes' act that allowed him to excise all impurities and darkness from himself, once more regaining his pure and unmarred primordial human form. That, in turn, then allowed him to ascend to become the current true ruler of Teyvat, the heavenly principles. But why would the apathic interval be inspired by that? Simple. The Shades created the apathic interval, and Phanes created the Shades. Them emulating their creator is only to be expected, and perhaps the ancient art of Trifactor Excision and other variants of it originate from other beings who witnessed that event from days of yore. By the way, as I was researching this, I came across a particular detail that I absolutely have to point out, as it is of tangential importance to understanding Phanes' circumstances. René de Petrichor, according to Caterpillar, believed that one's own will is an obstacle precisely because it could lead to accidentally receiving a vision, which would be a guaranteed path to destruction. We can also find a note where René explains this in more detail. To excise the self is not to die, but rather to die before death. That way, there is no life to be ended. Thus may one achieve eternity. This step is vital, for by this may one avoid receiving a vision by some error. To receive a vision is to sell oneself to the fate of the world, the Haimamene, and to evermore lose the chance to walk the correct path. Haimamene here is literally just another word for destiny, so don't worry about it too much. Let's look towards the NPCs from the Temple of Space again, and especially towards Dowser, who offhandedly mentions the following. After enduring the apathic interval, we could no longer receive visions. But wait, there's more. Remember what René said just earlier? To excise the self is not to die, but rather to die before death. That way, there is no life to be ended, thus may one achieve eternity. Eternity? Right, Nay, what do you have to say about this? Only through eternity are you closest to the heavenly principles. And would you look at that? He also confiscated visions, the physical manifestations of people's ambitions. Dearest, perhaps you weren't on a completely mistaken path after all. You were indeed emulating Phanes' ascension. It's just too bad that those who already received visions were already tied to the fate of the world, no longer able to rise above it. Now, why did I tell you about all of this? It's just to make this simple observation. But now, we don't have much more, but I still found it noteworthy and interesting. Speaking of, seeing how prominently he was featured in this part of the video, I suddenly have the desire to revisit another line of René's. Io Pan, that which lies beneath the great sea. We know that the second sentence basically translates to that which primordial human, or to make it more presentable, that which is the primordial human, or just the Primordial Human, take your pick. But what does Io Pan stand for? Is there anything special about it? Well, it originates from a poem by Aleister Crowley called Hymn to Pan. At its core, that poem represents the transcendence of duality, ego death, and the ecstatic primal merging of the human soul with the divine. What a nice reference! The writers even picked a thematically appropriate poem to pick a line from. Ego death and merging with the divine sounds pretty much exactly like what the renunciation of ego is all about. Io here means hail, and Pan is clearly a reference to the Greek god. Case closed, right? Oh no, it isn't. In Aleister Crowley's case, in his Hymn to Pan poem, he used the literal meaning of the Greek word Pan, which stands for all. More specifically, here he used it to symbolize the ultimate all-encompassing energy of the physical universe. Yeah, that makes sense. But why do I feel like I've heard this before? Physical universe? Yeah, that screams demiurge, and the demiurge is Phanes, so Pan stands for Phanes. Wait a moment, so if we translate that with all of this in mind, we get Hail, Hail, Phanes, the Primordial Human. Are you kidding me? It was literally right there all along. All I needed was to translate that one simple line from the Fontaine era, and I could have got to my ultimate conclusion way earlier. Yes, but now, considering how late I stumbled across it, it merely serves as final confirmation for what I already clearly laid out to you earlier. That should be all now, right? I'm not missing anything else, anything that could further reinforce what I just said while simultaneously throwing another batch of mysteries and questions my way? Yes, just like me, she was an angel created by the Primordial Humans, born with the instinct to guide living beings. Wait, what do you mean, Nicole? There are multiple Primordial Humans? Actually, when I think about it, it's really not that surprising. If a Primordial Human creates another human, while they are themselves in an unmarred, pure state, wouldn't that just result in another Primordial Human being created? So it's not strange if there is more than a singular one. But that is only one possible explanation, and the most boring one. So right here, we're going off the deep end. Mentally prepare yourselves, because what I'm about to state is purely my own speculation, relying on my overall understanding of Genshin lore and my gut feeling. I did not even attempt to deep dive into this, because I know I could spend months doing so, and the video would balloon in length to an unreasonable degree. Maybe I'll do it someday, but not today. Here we go. Zhongli, Mr. Mo, is one of these other Primordial Humans, but obviously not the very first one, Phanes. So how could this possibly be the case? Well, we do have a lot of missing links and incomplete intel, so there could be any number of reasons. Maybe Phanes just wanted to have some buddies? Or maybe the Morning Stars were actually also Primordial Humans, but lesser ones than Nibelung's magnum opus, Phanes? Who knows? Also, hear me out. If Phanes became pure again by excising his impurities, then where did those impurities go? Are they still around to this day? Have they become famous characters in the lore? What exactly happened to them? Did he fully destroy them, or are they still wandering the lands? But let's get back to Zhongli for a moment. We all know that he is one of the most mysterious and discussed figures in Genshin's lore. Feels like with every second new expansion, we learn more about him that paints him in an even more suspicious light, and gives him even more titles to add to his collection. To do him anything even remotely approaching justice, I'd have to create an entire video series just for him. However, I will definitely not do so, at least for now. I like the old man, don't get me wrong, but not enough to spend hundreds upon hundreds of hours working on a video series for him. I'm just not the right person for the job. There are countless people out there who love him more than me, and I'm sure they have already hit on the majority of all points that could ever be made about him. So what can and will I do? Well, exactly what I've done earlier, make claims and statements about him telling you how I currently feel about the guy. This is the wild speculation and unhinged claims section of the video after all, so I'll feel free to let loose without a care in the world. In my current understanding and mental framework of the lore, Zhongli occupies a very important position, one pretty much on par with the three Moon Sisters. That of a Morning Star, a Primordial Human not as perfected as Phanes, but nonetheless impressive. Now, am I necessarily correct about all of that? Probably not. After all, there's another part of myself whispering into my ears telling me that he could also be one of Phanes' discarded impurities. He was very violent and brutal, as well as kind of a simpleton in his early days, so it's not unimaginable that he could have been a sort of deadly self himself. But there is one glaring issue with this. Zhongli has used Trifactor Excision in front of Zibai. So how could a deadly self possibly use that art if it's a product of a similar one to begin with? Well, that may not be as huge of a problem as you might think, because another couple of questions can also be asked. What's stopping a deadly self from using Trifactor Excision? And would Phanes' excised impurities really be as simple as mere deadly selves? Don't look at me like that. I don't have the answers to any of those questions. I'm just asking them. Anyway, no matter how you slice it, when we get down to it, Zhongli is suspicious as hell. I cannot prove it, but he gives me Primordial Human vibes, and excised Phanes' impurity vibes. And I don't know what to do about that other than to share it with you and let you all worry about it from here on out. At one point in the past, I even briefly considered the idea that Zhongli, Deshret, Remus, and Decarabian could have all been Morning Stars once, but I quickly discarded that idea. The other three simply do not measure up to Zhongli in terms of mysteriousness, and Deshret plus Remus are far too reliant on their angel partners when figuring out the truth of the world to really strike me as Morning Star level figures. Perhaps they got memory wiped? I suppose that's possible, but at that point I'd just be making random guesses and trying to come up with excuses. As for Decarabian, we simply don't know enough about the guy to properly judge him yet. Regardless, amongst God Kings, Zhongli stands out like a sore thumb. He's just so unlike the others that it feels like he's just trying to blend in. That's also exactly how it feels like when we compare him to other Archons. The guy is an enigma for now, and it's driving me crazy. Tell me, Mr. Mo, just who exactly are you? My apologies, that was uncalled for. Before I mentally unravel any further, it's best that we end it here for today. Perhaps one day I'll have a properly researched and well-substantiated take on the whole Zhongli situation for you, but that day is not today. For now, all that you get are my gut feelings ramblings, and you'll have to live with that. This video script was written right around the time of Luna 7's release, but factors outside of my control pushed the release date back by quite a lot. I hope I'm still making it in time and will publish this before we go to the moon, else the deluge of lore indubitably hidden there will likely overthrow a couple of my claims and points. But that's fine with me. Like I said, this is not an ironclad case like my other videos. It's simply the best that I could do at the moment of writing. In a way, it's like science. It's the best with God, but it could get overturned completely as soon as we get more evidence. Anyway, let's end my rambling here. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the last section of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I'd be honored if you shared it with others who might like it. Subscribe to my channel for more Genshin Impact lore content, left a like, and possibly even wrote a comment to share your thoughts with me. All of my sources, relevant links, and anything else of note can be found in the sources Google Doc linked in the description of this video. In case I need to make any corrections or additions, I'll leave them in the pinned comment. I've been streaming my The Lore Through series for a while now, and will eventually be editing those streams into proper episodes for you to enjoy. Every stream has certainly been a blast, so it would be my honor if you end up stopping by one of these days. Eventually, other than just Genshin content, I aim to get around to making some videos talking about my own stories and writing in general as well. Speaking of my writing, if you'd allow me, let me briefly introduce you to my stories, because I desperately need to earn money to survive, just like anybody else, and I'm failing miserably at that. You can find the prologue volume, Rebirth ad Infinitum, of my novel series Reincarnation Cycle's Unfortunate Bug on Amazon. Once I can finally afford another cover, who knows when that will be, I can release another volume. As for my web novel series, The Heavenly Empress Assassin, you can read it for free on Webnovel, Royal Road, and Scribblehub, amongst other sites. I'd be honored if you checked either or both of them out. You'll find links to them in the description and pinned comment below. If you'd like to support me in my endeavors in general, please check out my Patreon. Every bit of support meaningfully helps me out. Currently, my Patreon is solely focused on providing benefits for the readers of my web novel series, but if you want to help me out monetarily, this is currently by far the best way. In any case, thank you so much for checking it out. And with that, it's already time for me to bid you farewell. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and don't do anything stupid. We're all head over heels for the Tsaritsa, I know, but let's make sure she's actually a proper widow and single mom before we make any moves on her, alright? We don't want her to be reviving her deceased lover and for us to look like complete scum. Wait, what do you mean? You're not worrying about that? I'm the only one panicking about this? Who are you kidding? I don't believe you. Not even for a second. Never forget, deep inside, we're all simps.
Could you please hear my voice, not hunger